Given that I'm on a career break, I've had no money coming into the bank account. So I had to find a way to travel around New Zealand without exhausting all of my savings. After doing extensive research online, I found many ways in which you can travel on a budget. In today's video, I'll be breaking down to you how I travelled New Zealand for less than 2,500 New Zealand dollars. G'day guys, welcome back to the channel. For those of you who are new, my name is Kishan and I'm a 25-year-old chartered accountant living in New Zealand. Generally speaking, travelling around New Zealand isn't that cheap. So I found ways in which I could travel around as cheap as possible without minimizing as much of my travel as I could around New Zealand. The 5 main components of cost on your trip are flights, accommodation, transport, food, and experiences. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you how to minimize all of these costs, and we're going to be taking a deep dive into each one of these categories, and I will be explaining to you how you can cut those costs and save money. I've also added some timestamps in case you guys wanted to jump to only particular sections in this video. Before I jump right into the video though, here's a breakdown of all my expenses. It cost me about 2,441 New Zealand dollars to be travelling for about 26 days. This translates to about 1,700 or 1,800 US dollars or about 1,300 Great British pounds. I'd say that's relatively cheap considering how long I travelled for and how many places I actually got to visit. Domestic flights within New Zealand can vary depending on the seasons and depends really on who you're flying with as well. There's only 2 main airlines here in New Zealand that you fly domestically, which is Air New Zealand, which is a little bit more premium, and Jetstar. Both these companies offer some cheap deals depending on the times that you're flying in. I flew during an off-peak season, which was around October, November when I flew. And I only flew just one flight, and that was from Auckland to Queenstown, which actually cost me, I think, $59, and I paid for check-in baggage because you're only allowed carry-on baggage of 7 kgs. So I paid for the 23 kilos as well, which cost me an additional $49. That brings me up to a total of $104 for my flights. In order to get cheap flights around New Zealand, I got 2 tips for you. Firstly, just keep monitoring Jetstar and Air New Zealand's websites. I'll leave the link to those websites down below. And also try and book flights maybe around the midweek region, maybe between Monday and Thursday, because the flights tend to be a little bit cheaper as opposed to flying on a Thursday, Friday, or a Saturday. I'd suggest to buy tickets during the off-peak seasons as they tend to be cheaper or just before a peak season starts. The tickets are quite expensive during the peak season of November, December, and Jan, given that it's about the summertime and lots of people are traveling during that time. Also, sometimes tickets tend to be expensive between June, July, and August, depending on if the ski fields are open and if a lot of people are traveling to those areas. Over the 26 days, I spent under $500 for accommodation, and I'd say that's pretty darn cheap. Out of these though, 4 nights I spent with a mate and 3 nights I spent at the camper van, which my brother had paid for. Obviously, excluding these, the calculation ends up being 470 divided by the 19 nights of accommodation that I paid for, and that works out to be just under $25 a night. This was super cheap as I was staying at hostels all over New Zealand. I was mostly staying at the YHAs, and there's YHAs all over New Zealand. They're super quality hostels, they're functional, they're clean, and they normally have really energetic, cool people that you can meet. The only downside to staying at a hostel is obviously that you have to share a room with other people. It's normally like 4-bed shared dorms or 6-bed or 8-bed shared dorms. For me, I didn't mind that too much because I was traveling by myself and it was quite comfortable and it was easy to meet people, and the cost only ranged between about $25 to $35 per night. I'd say that if you're traveling alone as a couple or with a bunch of mates, this is a really cheap option and it's a really quality option as well. However, if you are traveling as a family, this may not be the best option for you. You might be better off just finding some sort of a motel or some sort of a cheap hotel. I'd highly recommend staying at the Waiata Chase throughout your travels around New Zealand, with the exception of Kaikoura, in which I stayed in the Albatross Hostel, which was an amazing place and the hostel mates were awesome. So go check out that place if you are staying in Kaikoura. Over 26 days, I only spent $512, which works out to be just under $20 per day for transport. The reason my transport cost was so low was because I was using relocation cars throughout my entire trip. So from Queenstown all the way up to Auckland, I used relocation cars, and I used a website called Transfer Car. I'll leave a link to that website down below. But effectively what that website is it's a hub for all the car rental companies to put up any relocations they need for their cars. So what you do is you sign up to that website and you regularly look if there's any deals or any transport vehicles or relocation cars that need to be moved from one city to another city. The cost of these relocation vehicles is dirt cheap. In some scenarios, you don't even pay for the rental car itself. You only pay for the fuel and excess insurance. Excess insurance only if you wish to take it. However, I do recommend you do take it in case you get into some sort of an accident or something unforeseen actually happens. One of the vehicles that I took was actually from relocating it from Christchurch up to Nelson with Apex Cars over a span of 3 days, and it cost me $50 just for the excess insurance, and I paid about $100 maybe for fuel. A couple of caveats with using relocation vehicles though. They're not always available, so you have to frequently keep checking whether there's a relocation car near you or needs to be relocated to another place. The other thing is that it's normally on a restricted time basis, normally for a span of maybe 2 to 3 days, in some cases 4 days. You sometimes can extend this, but you'd probably have to call up the company that is asking to relocate the vehicle and ask if you can extend it, for which they sometimes do have a cost added to this. If your dates aren't flexible or relocation cars isn't for you, there are a couple of other options. You can obviously try hitchhiking, but I wouldn't really recommend that because you don't know when you're going to get a ride or who you're getting a ride from. You can obviously get a car from a rental car company, which can be a bit more expensive, or you can use hop-on, hop-off buses like Kiwi Experience. This tends to be a little bit more expensive, but it gives you a lot of flexibility in your travel, and it sort of covers your whole entire trip's transport, which is quite useful. The other option I would suggest if you're traveling by yourself with a young family or as a couple is you could try and find some sort of a camper van to travel around, which covers both your transport and accommodation. Or you could even find on Trade Me a cheap van and renovate this and make it into sort of a makeshift home. Or sometimes you even find these camper vans being sold on Trade Me, and once you've finished off using it, you can resell that camper van again. I'd say $830 on food and drinks is probably a little bit expensive. I could have definitely gone a little bit cheaper. It ends up working out to be about $32 per day. And I'd say I could have 100% gone a lot cheaper on this. But I think when you're there in the moment, it's hard for me to compromise on good food and good drinks. It's just way too hard for me. But if you do want to cut down your costs on food and drinks, there's many options in doing so. If you're not too health conscious, you could spend about $5 and get like a full pizza from Pizza Hut or Domino's, or even get a full $5 meal from one of the fast food restaurants. However, I mean, I don't think this is the best option, especially if you're traveling for a long period of time, but it is an option. If you would prefer to travel as cheap as possible, that is one option. Another option would be going to one of the supermarkets and making your own meals. I think that's a really, really cheap option. It's a healthy and effective way to do it. You can go to one of either Countdown, New World, or Pack and Save. Pack and Save tends to be the cheapest amongst the supermarkets, but it's not always found everywhere. Especially in the smaller towns, you only find like a Foursquare or a Countdown. Generally speaking, the cost of a meal costs between about 15 New Zealand dollars to about 30 New Zealand dollars. So it just depends on the place you're going and the location. However, the cheaper options normally cost about, I'd say, you get a meal for about $15 here. Once again, if you've got a place to stay and you've got a fridge and you've got a proper kitchen, I'd highly recommend just buying your groceries and making your own meals. Even if it's maybe a couple of times a week, you end up saving a lot of costs by doing this, and you can make yourself multiple meals and that'll feed you for a couple of days. Another way is to find cheap deals online. You sometimes find them on cheapies.co.nz, but they tend to be normally at your fast food chains. Or you can sometimes find some cheap meals on Grab One website as well. I'll leave a link to both of those websites down below. Personally, I'd say you couldn't really put a price on experiences. You know, I normally do end up paying a little bit more money for experiences, and I'm sure a lot of us do, because it's the one part of our travel that you cannot compromise on. I spent about $520 over my entire trip, and I'd say that's not too bad given that it was a long trip. There's a lot of things I did. However, I would say that experiences in New Zealand can be quite expensive, whether it's a scenic flight in Mount Cook or a bungee jump in Queenstown or skydive in Wanaka. All of these can be a little bit expensive. So what I'd recommend you do is jump onto the Grab One website around the time of your travel and look for any deals that you can find on these experiences. The Grab One website is really good at finding deals, and sometimes you can find 10 to 20% off the cost of your activity. You can also find alternatives to the experiences that you were thinking of. So maybe you wanted to do kayaking, but on the website you have an option to do canoeing, and that might end up being a lot cheaper. So always looking on that website gives you a lot of options, gives you a lot of things to think about, and it definitely gives you great deals. So go check that website out. Another option is hostels or hotels that you stay at, or even the Kiwi Experience, tend to give you some sort of discounts on experiences or activities around that area. So make sure you do ask the people at the reception if there's any discounts, or your tour guides if there's any discounts for any of the activities in that area, because they sometimes will have some sort of connection with the activity or the people that run it, and they can give you maybe a 5 to 10% discount. And a saving's a saving, right? So there you guys are. I've given you many options to travel around New Zealand in a cheap way. Make sure you hit the like button if you've enjoyed this video, and make sure to subscribe to more content like this. I'll see you guys on the next video. Cheers.